Good afternoon to our Spanish listeners. Good morning, Washington. Good morning, Mrs. Flournoy, our speaker of today. Good afternoon, Mr. Tribble, the Chargé d'Affaires of the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. I am Manuel Alabart. I am the Secretary General of INCIPE, which is a Spanish think tank based in Madrid. We continue today our video talks on the role of the U.S. in today's world within the series on world powers of INCIPE. These talks began in January with former NATO's Secretary General and former European Union's High Representative for Security and Foreign Affairs, Javier Solana, and will come to a close at the beginning of May with the participation of former Spanish Defense Minister Eduardo Serra. So I'm very pleased to greet today an outstanding personality of the U.S. defense and security establishment, Mrs. Flournoy, who will be introduced to our audience by the head of the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. But before giving the floor to Mr. Tribble, I will give it to Vicente Garrido, our Director General, who will give us the details of how this video conference is going to proceed. So Vicente, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Manuel. And thank you also to the Embassy of the United States to Madrid because of the support in organizing this event today. And thank you, of course, Michèle Flournoy. Well, it's as usual. You can send your questions through YouTube, through the web chat in YouTube, and you can also use pose your question through Twitter. Remember the hashtag in Spanish, Grandes Potencias EE.UU. At the end, I will collect all your questions, or as much as possible, but remember, we will conclude after 1 hour, and we will be very, very strict on it. And I kindly remind you to send your questions as soon as possible. So thank you very much. Then the presentation of Mrs. Flournoy will be done by the Chargé of Affairs of the American Embassy, or United States Embassy to Madrid, Mr. Conrad Tribble. Please, Conrad.
Hello, everybody, and thank you again, Ambassador and Vicente. It's great to be back online with our friends at INCIPE. Today, I have the pleasure and the honor of just introducing our expert. Michèle Flournoy is one of the United States' leading experts in defense and security policy. She brings a wealth of expertise, both as an intellectual and as a policymaker in the arena, so to speak. And she's really been one of our leading lights over the last couple of decades. She's now the managing director or managing partner of WestExec Advisors, a consulting firm that she founded or co-founded a few years ago with Tony Blinken, who's now the Secretary of State. She co-founded and was the chief executive officer for a very influential think tank, the Center for a New American Security. And she has also served at the highest levels of government as Undersecretary of Defense for Policy in the Pentagon from 2009 to 2012. And there's a long list of other accomplishments and achievements and awards, a couple of schools named Harvard and Oxford in there as well. But the thing that also stands out about Michèle, and that I'm very aware of from people who talk to me about the influence that she's had on her, is over the years she has been a mentor and a developer of talent for many, many, many young and especially female experts in national security, defense policy, foreign policy. She's known as one of the best mentors around Washington, and it makes her even more important in the world of national security policy. And so very delighted to include that as part of one of the things that's so important about her. So Michèle, we really appreciate you doing this. We are delighted to have you as part of the speaker series. We look forward to hearing from you and hearing sort of the perspective of Washington on defense policy. And I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great, Conrad, thank you so much. I'm very honored to have a chance to speak to this esteemed audience, and it's really a pleasure to be hosted by both the U.S. Embassy and INCIPE. I understand that you're having a larger discussion, a larger series on the role of global powers in the international community. And I think the topic is incredibly timely because we're really shifting from a period where we've been predominantly focused on missions like counterterrorism and weak and failing states and instability. Not that those things are going away, but what the real focus now is the return of great power competition and the return of that competition among US, China, to a lesser extent, Russia, in a time of profound technological disruption that's going to be affecting our economies, our security, and so forth. So it's a really timely topic, and really I'm very pleased to join you and looking forward to the discussion. I'm going to just make some introductory remarks up front and talk about three key things to set the table. One is the likely defense priorities for the Biden administration. The second is why there's so much of a focus on diversity in defense and national security more broadly, a more diverse workforce and talent pipeline. And third, a little bit about the importance of transatlantic relations and the role of allies like Spain in the current international environment and, in the perspective of the new administration. So let me start with some of the defense priorities. The Biden administration is really, as I said, taking office at this inflection point where there's really a shift of greater focus on great power competition that is multidimensional, economic, technological, ideological, and military. And in this environment, the defense outlook of the new administration is really shaped by four key factors. The first, there's a real sense of urgency that we have to enhance the United States' ability to compete with China and, frankly, to deter conflict with China. The second is that a sense that our existing kind of defense program or our legacy systems that we've been investing in, may not be adequate for what we need in the future. So there's a sense that we are overinvested in legacy systems and have to date moved too slowly in adopting and integrating and scaling some of the key emerging technologies and capabilities that will be critical to deterring China and Russia in the future. The third related point is this sense of we've got to make some bigger bets to expedite innovation, really doubling down on our investment in things like the teaming of manned and unmanned systems, the creation of resilient command and control networks, the use of AI, artificial intelligence, to enable better, faster human decision-making, and so forth. So we need to place some big bets for the future. And lastly, we need to do that in an environment, a budget environment, that is going to be more constrained. You've seen in the administration's first budget request for fiscal year 22, a relatively flat defense budget. Slight growth, but not enough to keep pace with the pace of inflation, because there's so many other demands, for dealing with COVID, for restarting the economy, for investing in 21st century infrastructure, public health, so many domestic demands. So defense policy, we're not going to solve this problem by spending more on defense. We're going to have to spend smarter. So I do think that there'll be some continuity in the sense that when the administration turns to defense strategy, there'll be some certain things that will remain operative, if you will. The objectives of really focusing on strengthening our alliances and partnerships will be a core element of this administration's defense strategy. The emphasis on reforming the department to improve performance will be there. And the sense that we've got to become more efficient in deploying our resources to those key technology areas that will give us the edge, in the future. So the administration will go through a defense review. It will generate a strategy, I'm guessing, towards the end of this year, the beginning of next year. But what we have seen in the meantime, as I mentioned, is the president's first defense budget, which does kind of suggest some of the key priorities that we can expect. The first is, again, a focus on deterring China. The budget request explicitly prioritizes the need to counter the threat from China as the Defense Department's top challenge. And again, specifically points to the role of allies and partners in achieving these objectives. The second is preserving and enhancing the United States technological edge. You know, we have the best military in the world, but unless we continue to invest in new technologies and their adoption, we're going to lose that edge over time. It will atrophy. And so you'll see in the budget a prioritization of investment in defense research and development, testing and evaluation to help speed the development of these next generation capabilities. And then the third theme is making some hard choices. The department is going to have to divest from, in some legacy areas, in order to free up resources for strengthening our work with allies, for strengthening our investment in new technologies. And so there's a divestment element of the agenda, which is obviously usually the most controversial part of the program, and especially when it comes to getting Congress on board to support the new direction. So the last thing I'll mention as sort of a new areas of emphasis from this administration are really promoting climate resilience and energy efficiency, not only nationwide, but really thinking about the Department of Defense as a platform for those objectives. And so very clear that the administration wants to make U.S. military installations climate resilient, invest in the necessary research and development to enable this, and mitigate the effects of climate change. I think the second piece that is a big theme is doubling down on the department's greatest asset, which is its people. And the administration is very much committed to tackling some of these challenges like sexual harassment, discrimination, and some evidence of extremist groups recruiting members of the military for their ranks. So with that as kind of an overview, I want to turn to talk a little bit about why there's such a priority in enhancing the diversity of the DoD, of the U.S. government workforce in general, but in DoD in particular. And I think the first thing I would say is, when you are looking at defense of a democracy, it's really important that the cohort of people who are in charge of defense and executing defense really looks like the population that they are sworn to protect, the population that they are serving. And while we have certainly made progress in some areas, like the inclusion of more and more women in this field, there's a lot of work to be done, to get to a much more diverse population or a much more diverse workforce. The second argument for putting an emphasis on this is that if you look at all of the business literature, the articles in Harvard Business Review, for example, it's very clear that the more diverse a leadership team is, the higher the performance of the organization. There's tons of studies which have actually documented that the diversity brings diversity of perspective and better decision-making, and that actually affects the bottom line of organizational performance. And I've definitely witnessed that myself, around the Situation Room table in the White House in the Obama administration. And so the Biden administration is making great strides in appointing a very diverse cohort of leaders to senior positions in the Department of Defense. You all have seen we have the first African-American Secretary of Defense. We have the first woman Deputy Secretary of Defense. I had held the the honor of having been the most senior woman, and now we have an even more senior woman, Kathleen Hicks, as the deputy, and that's just great progress. You've seen President Biden nominate 2 female 4-star generals to be combatant commanders of Transcom and Southcom going forward. So, there's really a serious effort being done here, as well as an internal task force to really understand where we're falling short, why are we falling short. For example, our officer corps is not as diverse as the civilian population. Why is that? Where are the barriers? How can we remove them? So I do think this is an exciting area where the administration is going to put a lot of emphasis on continuing to break down barriers, enhancing the talent pool, both on coming into the military, but also the civilian side of defense and national security. And that is ultimately going to help us keep our edge and our performance going forward. The last topic I want to just touch on before we open it up for discussion is the importance of allies like Spain, and why the Biden administration is so focused on this issue. I think there's a very deep understanding that when you look at the international challenges we face, there's literally not a single one that we can solve by ourselves, that we are much more effective in deterring Russia or deterring China or building capacity of others when we approach these challenges as partners, as in a coalition. And so, and I think the Biden administration is full of people who understand that the transatlantic relationships, the NATO allies, are kind of first among equals. They are, you all are the ones who show up when the U.S. is aiming to deal with a challenge, whether it's Afghanistan or somewhere else. And we hope, I think we want, the United States, this administration wants to reassure our allies that we also can be counted on to show up when you have a challenge before you. I think it's understood that our allies are our greatest force multiplier, and that the NATO alliance is absolutely key, not only to preserving peace and stability in Europe, but increasingly as an organization that will be instrumental in addressing challenges ranging from the rise of China to climate change to dealing with new technologies that are emerging. When it comes to the U.S. and Spain specifically, you all understand better than most how long and deep a relationship we have, not only through NATO, but bilaterally and in our work together in other international organizations. And that extends to a very deep defense relationship. As you know, the United States has really important forces that are situated in both Rota and Morón, and we're incredibly grateful to our Spanish allies for the use of these facilities. That close relationship and those forces allow for very good cooperation and frequent training between our forces. I was told that in the last year or so, we've had 150 or more events programmed across 7 working groups addressing all aspects of defense and national security. So really important value and valued bilateral relationship on the military side. And then in the NATO context, Spain is also a valued ally, and particularly in the hosting some very valuable NATO infrastructure and being a critical participant in key NATO activities. Most recent example, the Spanish frigate Cristobal Colón, ending a 5-month deployment in the Mediterranean as part of the NATO permanent SNMG-2 maritime group. I'm told that frigate's going to go back to sea again in May for a formidable Shield 21 exercise. So, and Spain is chairing the Maritime Theater Missile Defense Forum. So this is all really important day-to-day work to deter and defend members of the alliance. And then that's not even to mention the role that Spain has been playing in leading the rotation of NATO's Baltic air policing mission. So really important work. I would say beyond the immediate NATO area, I think the United States very much appreciates and values the work that Spain is doing in the dealing with the shared security and development challenges that we see in the Sahel. We understand this is a real priority for Spanish foreign policy, and that you've had really extensive, deep experience with development programs there. And just last month, I know our State Department announced $80 million in humanitarian assistance to help respond to the crisis in the Sahel. And this was made, at a meeting with you all at the Coalition for the Sahel. So, these are all examples of activities where the US and Spain are sort of joined together, working to promote peace and stability in the transatlantic community, but also beyond. And I think it's, again, you have an administration in office now that really appreciates the value of that deep cooperation across the board. So let me just stop there and turn it back over to our moderator and look forward to responding to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Flournoy. We have received, in fact, a lot of questions via email and now are coming through the chat, through the YouTube chat. We have so far 7 questions. Well, the first one is related to the coronavirus and how the coronavirus has affected, if it has, to the United States efforts on security in a more or less significant way.
Sure. Well, I think, turning the corner on Corona, getting the virus under control is job number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the Biden administration. They have rapidly increased the distribution of vaccines. We are rapidly building up our testing capability and so forth. So this is a primary area of focus. And then I would say next, closely behind that, is getting our economy working again and building, recovering from the impacts of COVID. In terms of the impact on military and defense specifically, I think it's been managed very well. I actually have a front row seat on this as the mother of a young officer in the US Navy who's just come into the fleet, and he's been in training for the last year, and I think there was a 2-month period where things were paused for them to kind of get a system in place of testing and vaccination and retesting and quarantine, all this stuff. And then things kind of picked back up. So I think there's certainly been a period of adjustment, but I think the US military has not suffered any permanent or significant readiness shortfalls as a result of COVID. So that is very good news.
So thank you. The second one, I need maybe a little bit elaboration, because the question is focused on based on the President Biden decision to appoint a general to lead the Department of Defense, and the together with the recent decision to withdraw United States troops from Afghanistan, may suggest that we have a balance or about the civilian control of the military, and the question is there a decline of civilian control over the military, or basing the recent decision of withdrawal of youth troops from Afghanistan is not the case? What is your opinion?
So, I think the Biden administration inherited a very concerning situation in terms of civilian control. The first is that you had a situation where former general officers were being used in the political campaigns of the different parties. And I think in our system, one of the real foundational cornerstones of our system is the apolitical nature of the United States military, meaning they swear an oath to the Constitution, not to a particular president or a particular party or a particular person, but to the Constitution. And when a president like Trump uses the US military in a political fashion, whether that's bringing retired folks to the stage, and to be fair, both parties did this, or what I think really horrified a number of senior military folks is using the military in Lafayette Square to put down peaceful civilian protesters, turning members of the military on the civilian population for domestic security that was unwarranted. That generated a huge reaction from everybody from former, General Mattis to Admiral Mullen to very senior military leaders, including the sitting chairman, who I think appeared in that moment and then regretted it afterwards and then publicly apologized. So that was of concern. And then you also had President Trump intervening in the military justice system, pardoning people who had been found to be war criminals by a military court, and then pardoning them, sort of denying the military institution the ability to hold its own accountable. So all of these things were very, very worrisome. And then, enter the Biden administration. So I think what they've done is really try to take a number of steps to sort of correct that balance. And without detailing, those in detail, what I will say is I actually read Afghanistan differently. I think whether you think it's the right decision or the wrong decision, this is a decision that I think President Biden knew he wanted to make, even when he was if he could have as vice president, certainly as a candidate and now as president. He was ready to end the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan, even, and he may have gotten some military advice that encouraged him to take a more conditions-based approach. But the fact that he's made that decision, against the advice of some, with the support of others, he's made the decision and it's going to be carried out, is actually a sign of a strengthening of civilian control in my view. But I think this is a journey that's going to take some time, because I think I think there was a lot of damage done over the last 4 years, and it's going to take some time to fully correct and rebalance the relationship.
Thank you. Turning to Asia, well, specifically on the United States and China relations, it appears that this tension for sure and mounting in general, and specifically in the Taiwan Straits in particular. The question is the United States doing enough, in your opinion, in technology and maritime cooperation with the countries of ASEAN and other states in Asia? And how do you see the relations and the future, whether cooperation or more confrontation in security terms with China?
Yeah. So when you look at the China relationship, it is multifaceted and complex. I mean, we do have sort of competitive elements economically, technologically, ideologically, militarily. But we also have key areas where we have to cooperate. We are very integrated and mutually dependent with regard to trade. There's no way to address climate change effectively unless the US and China are cooperating along with others in the international community. Same can be said for preventing the next pandemic, whatever that looks like. And the same can be said for dealing with problems of proliferation like North Korea or Iran. So, there has to be a cooperative agenda in this context of growing competition. I think the Biden administration's approach to China is to not rush into some tactical negotiations about tariffs or trade or what have you, but to take some time to sort of reset the table, if you will. The first way to reset the table is to strengthen our foundations at home, get COVID under control, jumpstart the economic recovery, and counter through, action and evidence this pernicious narrative in Beijing of U.S. decline. That the U.S. has fumbled. We're down and out. It's like there's a boxer who's on the ground and not getting back up. That is not the United States of America. We are going to show over the next year our strength and our resilience in recovering from this last year of challenge. So they'd like to have that position of strength when they really come back to the table with China. Number two is we see our allies and our partners, not only in Europe, but particularly in Asia, and as was mentioned, the ASEAN countries, as a great source of strength. You see the administration's first big diplomatic initiative was a meeting of the Quad, bringing together Australia, India, Japan, with the United States to talk about everything from COVID response to how do we deal with China. The first visit of a foreign leader to the United States is the Prime Minister of Japan, again, sending a signal of how we value our allies and how important they will be, particularly in Asia. And so I think, this is the approach the administration's taking. I think they've signaled they're very eager to sit down US-EU and have a dialogue about some of the challenges we share with regard to China, and whether it's intellectual property theft or protecting technology from being stolen or, unfair trade practices. We want to start those conversations with our allies first and then go to the table together as much as possible to deal with China. So that's how I would describe the approach, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
So thank you. Far more difficult still, because it's not only now about China, but China and Russia together. Mm-hmm. And some participants are asking about how can the West address the current situation with Russia and China, also, of course, the United States, and if it's possible to address the threat of two big enemies at the same time.
Yeah, no, I do think that we have to deal with both Russia and China. And I do think, NATO is our primary coalition and alliance, gives us our primary toolkit, if you will, for dealing with Russia, for deterring, not only deterring military conflict, but also dealing with them in the gray zone, as Putin is that's where he likes to operate and use his KGB playbook. So we have to do that. But I also think we've got to pay attention to the relationship between China and Russia. And I think right now it's largely a sort of marriage of convenience. When it suits them to join together and push back against the United States or come together on an issue, they do so. But I don't see a lot of deep trust. I don't see a lot of deep cooperation. The things they announce at their summits always sound much bigger than they actually are in practice. But I do think we have to keep a careful eye on these two powers, because when they do, show up together arm in arm, it's a much more difficult challenge for us to deal with than if we're dealing with them separately.
It's a follow-up of this question, more specific, center on the outer space race. And specifically, I know that this is maybe a very technical question. It's the reaction. It's do you see some reaction from the United States Space Agency regarding the China and Russia alliance, strong alliance on the space race, especially in sharing technologies, objectives?
Yeah. So I think, on the commercial, side, there's going to be a lot of competition for space companies for launching systems, building satellite communication satellites, etc. That's healthy and for the most part fine, and space can continue to be an area of cooperation. Such, even in these difficult times, we've been able to continue to cooperate on this International Space Station together for a while, for example. But I think on the military or defense side of the house, we're seeing much more aggressive Chinese and Russian action in terms of putting capabilities in space or developing terrestrial capabilities that can be launched into space that really sort of may make space more of a battlefield in the future. Russian doctrine, Chinese doctrine both talk about early actions in space to try to prevent the US and its allies from being able to see, move their forces, navigate, communicate, target, strike, etc. So they see the cyber domain and the space domain as early areas to try to cripple any US or NATO or allied response to aggression that they may launch. So I think that understanding and seeing not only Russia and China talk about it, but them actually starting to field systems of concern with anti-satellite capabilities as part of what's generated a greater focus on defensive space, well, situational awareness of space and defensive space-based assets on the part of the United States. So the establishment of the Space Defense Agency, the establishment of the Space Force to organize and train and equip those who will serve in Space Command. This is all in response very much to this system, to this situation where space is becoming more of a domain where we have to pay attention in terms of deterring and defeating aggression from others.
Thank you so much. Well, going now to the two proliferators concerns that you mentioned in your presentation. As you guess, now we are going to speak about Iran and North Korea. Regarding, as you know, President Biden already announced as one of the first measures, just starting its mandate, the decision of the United States to rejoin the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Platform Action with Iran. But now, how do you see this prospect, especially after yesterday's Iran's government's announcement to enrich uranium to 60%, and the difficulties that this decision also implies? Not only this, but also taking into consideration that we will have the presidential election in Iran. How do you see the prospect in a medium, I would not say it in the short term, for the United States to rejoin the agreement? Thank you.
So, as you said, I think the Biden administration wants to get both parties or have the U.S. rejoin and the Iranians return to compliance with the original JCPOA as a first step towards negotiating an agreement that has a more extended timeline, but also that starts to also deal with some of the other issues of concern, such as Iran's ballistic missile development and its support for terrorism across the region. But it's a first step. So as you noted, Iran is having presidential elections in June. So I think it's almost impossible, certainly highly unlikely, that we're going to see a resolution of all of these issues before that presidential election. that means there'll be some delay as a new administration in Iran forms and then comes back to the table. But what the two sides are doing through the indirect talks through, with our European friends kind of serving as a go-between, is they formed two working groups. One is a working group that basically looks at what would Iran have to do? What are the actions they would take to come back into compliance with the JCPOA? And that is it's fairly straightforward. You mentioned they're moving in the wrong direction, meaning now enriching uranium to higher levels of in the wake of Israel's, what we think is Israel's sabotage of the Natanz facility and the destruction of a number of centrifuges there. I think Israel is not happy about the JCPOA discussions and, is going to do their best to kind of throw a wrench in the works, and they want to handle Iran a different way. But even with that, it's fairly straightforward to figure out how Iran would come back into compliance. More complicated is what would be involved in the lifting of U.S. sanctions against Iran. And this is the topic of the second working group, because you really have three baskets of sanctions. You have the sanctions that were directly related to Iran's nuclear program. And the assumption is if they came back into compliance, those would be lifted. But you also have a whole host of U.S. sanctions that have been put on Iran for other reasons, such as its support for terrorism or other illicit activities. And those are much less likely to be lifted, and so that's a problem. And then the third basket is sanctions that are there for other reasons, non-nuclear reasons, but would dull the effect or the impact, lessen the impact of lifting the nuclear sanctions. So this is very complicated, and this will need a lot of work. I think the administration's going to keep at it. It's a priority for them to move forward with this. But as you suggested, this is going to take some time. This is going to not be a near-term deal. This is a mid to longer-term deal if it happens.
Thank you so much, especially for your clarity when mentioning the presumably involvement of the Israelis in the sabotage of the Natanz facilities. Regarding North Korea, former President Donald Trump was very, very confident about achieving that agreement. It's a kind of agreement with North Korea in order to denuclearize the North Korea. But the fact is that after the Singapore summit, nothing had happened, and especially now, North Korea has recovered the missile test. Well, what is your prospect for the President Biden administration to achieve such an agreement? It's still something. It's a dream, something in which we have been dreaming in the last 30 years, or this give peace a chance. In this case, give the possibility of denuclearization a chance. Thank you.
To your point, this is, I remember my first briefing coming in as an official in the Clinton administration in 1993 was on prospects for an agreement with North Korea. So we have been working at this, many administrations in many countries for many years, and still we've had some progress, but more setbacks than progress. So, look, I think the Biden administration still sees this as an important foreign policy objective, with denuclearization still as the goal. I think you'll see this administration take a more normal or recognized approach to this diplomacy, rather than sort of starting with grand declarations at the presidential summit level. You're likely to see them establish working level contacts and try to explore diplomatically whether it's possible to get North Korea to the table for a productive conversation. I think, again, their philosophy is by, with, and through allies. You'll see them, and partners. They understand that there are other countries that are in a better position to influence North Korea's calculus, particularly China and to a lesser extent Russia. They need to be part of this conversation as well. So I don't think they have any illusions that this is going to be easy or fast, but I do think they are committed to trying to get back to the negotiating table to see what is possible with South Korea, with China, with Russia, with others by our side, to try to convince North Korea to to get at least, to at least take some risk reduction measures and stop any further provocations, and potentially eventually to roll back its elements of its program in exchange for greater economic integration, which is really, what their population most needs.
Okay, we have 3 last questions. Sorry for those questions that arrived already now, because we will not have the time to pick up these questions. But in fact, the next question is could be a matter for the 1-2 hours session, but is about the relation in security military terms with Russia, and especially you already referred to this, but do you foresee a new arms race regarding relation between the United States and Russia, in spite of the decision for instance, to extend the validity, the extension of the START treaty? But do you see more room for confrontation with Russia in terms of a new arms race or not?
I don't. I mean, Russia has continued to develop new types of nuclear weapons over the last many years. And while the U.S. has certainly responded in terms of investing in countermeasures and defenses and so forth, that has not provoked a new nuclear arms race. I think the Biden administration came in with a real priority on extending the New START framework to try to contain the competition in the strategic nuclear domain. And I don't foresee them, restarting a nuclear arms race with Russia or competing in that way. I think where the competition is, I actually also think NATO has done a really good job of enhancing our ability to deter conventional conflict with Russia, at least in the NATO area. Obviously, we're seeing all kinds of saber rattling vis-a-vis Ukraine, and Russia may continue to be very aggressive on its immediate periphery. But when it comes to NATO members, I think deterrence is in a good place vis-a-vis Russia. Where we're going to see increased action, and we're already seeing it, is in the gray zone, in cyber attacks like SolarWinds, in use of propaganda, the exploitation of social media to sow division and make, complicate the politics across our democracies. These are the areas of this use of nerve agents to assassinate political opposition. I mean, this is the playbook that Putin is going to use, and we should expect him to continue to use. And frankly, we as allies need to do better in putting our heads together to figure out how do we deter Russian action in that gray zone, not just at the nuclear level, not just at the conventional military level, but in the area where Putin really likes to operate and feels that he has some advantage.
Thank you. We go now to the last question regarding with Spain, and specifically you referred to the very important role and Spain is also well acknowledged of Morón and Rota military bases. The question are related with do you think what are the role of these two military bases, and especially if you think that the two bases, Rota and Morón, improve the role in the Sahel area, bilateral action, United States, Spain, in case of this, or what?
Yes, no, I mean, I think they're absolutely critical. I haven't heard anything but appreciation for the importance of those facilities. I think, as the U.S. defense team gets in place beyond, the secretary and the deputy, you will see people like, whoever comes in, the nominee for my old job, engaging on this issue, various assistant secretaries engaging on this issue to make sure that we do renew our cooperation and extend our work together. And again, these facilities are critical for, obviously, missile defense in Europe, but also, as you mentioned in the question, for cooperation that extends into the counterterrorism area and into other concerns that we share in the Sahel. So I think I'm not sure of the timeline for these discussions, but I think as soon as you have the right officials in place, you will be seeing a positive engagement I would expect you'd see positive engagement from the Department of Defense on these issues.
Well, it's the last, well, in fact, we have still time for two. This question is related with the, I will let the last one related with the Spanish and United States agreement, but we have still one more. Since you mentioned the presumably attribution of the attack to Israel in Natab, what is your opinion about the Israel, not perception, but do you think that this action increased the tension in the Middle East more than, in fact, to help to solve the problems in the region?
So, I think that Israel has long had a different perspective on and approach to the Iranian nuclear program. They see it as an existential threat. And when they don't have confidence that, negotiations are moving quickly or fast enough, they will take matters into their own hands. I'm not making excuses for them. I think in this case, they're not sure they want, I think the leadership, now it's not all Israelis, but I think the prime minister doesn't necessarily want these negotiations to be successful. So this was a way of throwing a wrench in the works, if you will, but with plausible deniability, right? So I think one of the things that will be very important for the new U.S. administration is to engage directly with Israel on this issue and to try to get on the same page and to try to avoid these situations where, once one actor is doing something that undermines the efforts of another, when we both have the same goal of preventing Iran from being a nuclear weapons power, right? So I think there's some good diplomatic work that needs to be done there. But, the thing that strategically, Israel actually has a great opportunity in the region right now with the conclusion of the initial Abraham Accords, particularly with UAE, now other countries coming forward. You have the chance for Israel to gain some really strategic partners among the Gulf states who share their concern about Iran, who are willing to more openly cooperate with Israel in everything from defense to commerce to energy. But they could they could limit that opportunity by taking actions that the Gulf Arabs can't possibly condone or approve, whether it's accessing Palestinian land unilaterally or undertaking actions that may require a negative response from the Gulf states. So I think they have to navigate. They have a real opportunity, and I think they have to be thinking more strategically than tactically in terms of how do they really move towards a positive realignment within the Middle East.
Yeah. The last question, I am aware that this question is maybe too specific for the and exclusively centered on Spain. It's about the defense agreement between the United States and Spain is going to end in 1 month's time, the 22nd of May, and a new signature is required. what aspect would you like to highlight, maybe? And in this case, maybe I should remember here that we have the advantage of having here the chargé of affairs of the United States Embassy to Spain, Mr. Tribble, that maybe want also to intervene at the last moment and to add something.
Yes, of course. I don't know the details of the negotiations about the agreement because I'm no longer in government, but I would say, as I have, the U.S. bilateral relationship with Spain, particularly in the defense areas, absolutely critical. It's appreciated, it's valued. We want to build on the success we've had so far. That includes, extending the relationship going forward, and frankly, trying to do more, trying to find where can we cooperate even more in support of our shared interests. So let me leave my comment there, and I would turn it back over to the chargé to comment on the specific agreement and how the negotiations are going.
Hi, thank you. It's actually a very easy and quick answer. The agreement, the most recent update was 8 years ago. It was agreed that it would run for 8 years and then be renewed automatically every year unless either of the parties requested a renegotiation for whatever reason. So in fact, that first 8-year period does run out this year, but it will automatically renew. There's no negotiation that has to take place. So neither the Spain or the U.S. government has indicated a need to renegotiate it. We're both very happy with the cooperation. And if the time comes when some change is needed because of changes in force posture or anything else, then we have a process in place to renegotiate it. But never fear, the agreement is automatically renegotiated and or automatically renewed until and unless one party decides to request a renegotiation.
Some good news to end on.
Very much, Mrs. Flournoy, and especially for having passed successfully, I would say, this lot of questions, lot of very, very not easy questions, but I think you pass with big success this exam, if I may say that. And let me also thank in the name of the two co-organizers of these events, two partners, not only INCIPE, but also the Spain United States Council Foundation, with whom we organize this event today and the rest of the events that we have been organizing in the last 2 months. And thank you also, you, Conrad, for your support for being with us today also. And now, please, I have only to pass the microphone, in this case, to Ambassador Alabat, Secretary General of INCIPE, for closing this event today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Flournoy, for a most interesting talk. I really appreciate the clarity of your ideas and I would say the neatness of your expose. I do so in the name of INCIPE. Please accept our thanks. In the name also of the foundation of the US-Spain Foundation, which is the co-host of this event. And of course, I would like also to express my thanks to the American Embassy in Madrid and to the chargé, Mr. Tribble. Please, I hope that you will be again our speaker in the future. I hope you will consider yourself from now on a friend not only of the Council, the US-Spain Council, but also of the INCIPE, of our think tank. Our next event in this series, I would like to tell our viewers, will be next Thursday, April 22. We will have here Ms. Amanda Mars, which is the US correspondent of Spanish newspaper El País. She is based in Washington, D.C., and she will give us an overview of the role of the US media since President Joe Biden took over as president. And finally, as I said at the beginning, on May 6th, these talks, this series on the US will come to a close with the presence and the participation of Eduardo Serra, former Spanish Minister of Defense, who also happens to be the honorary president of INCIPE, of my think tank. So thank you very much to all of you. Please take care, fight against the virus as if it still was a dangerous enemy. Until it's defeated, it's not defeated. So take care and hope to see you soon. Adios. So long to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.